Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, to a time when the desert sands held secrets as vast as the sky above. Imagine a land where towering obelisks pierced the heavens, and the Nile, a ribbon of life, snaked through a kingdom built on ancient rites and unwavering beliefs. Picture the scent of frankincense mingling with the dry desert air, the rhythmic clang of chisels against stone echoing through the valleys, and the murmur of prayers rising to unseen gods. This was a world where a pharaoh wasn't just a ruler. He was a living god, the bridge between mortals and the divine, responsible for the very sun's rising. And in this ancient, awe-inspiring world, a young pharaoh, barely out of his boyhood, ascended to the golden throne. You probably wouldn't survive a single day in his sandals, with the weight of an entire civilization resting on your young shoulders. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in, why not drop a comment below and let me know where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our young pharaoh, let's call him Nebka, inherited a kingdom steeped in tradition, but facing its own subtle anxieties. He was just a boy, really, when the crown was placed upon his head, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, a symbol of immense power and even greater responsibility. From his earliest memories, he had been tutored into the intricate rituals, the sacred texts, and the profound importance of the afterlife. For a pharaoh, death was not an end, but a transition, a grand journey to the field of reeds, a paradise where he would join the gods and continue to watch over his people. To achieve this eternal bliss, however, required meticulous preparation. His body had to be preserved, his tomb grand and secure, filled with all the necessities for his otherworldly existence. It was a cosmic contract, a promise between the living ruler and the divine order, ensuring the prosperity of Egypt itself. The pressure on Nebka was immense, a silent, constant hum beneath the lavish court life. Every decision he made, every decree he issued was weighed against the ultimate goal, a secure and glorious passage into the afterlife. He understood, with a gravity far beyond his years, that his eternal resting place was not merely a grave, but a statement, a testament to his piety, his power, and his unwavering faith in the cosmic balance. The whispers of his ancestors, the expectations of his priests, and the very stability of his kingdom all hinged on the construction of a magnificent tomb, one that would echo his greatness for all eternity. It was a burden he carried not with resentment, but with a profound sense of duty, knowing that his journey through death was intertwined with the very soul of Egypt. With the weight of his destiny settling firmly upon him, young Nebka turned his gaze toward the task that would define his earthly reign as much as his eternal one, the construction of his tomb. This wasn't just a burial chamber, it was to be an entire complex, a monumental statement carved from the very bedrock of Egypt, a grand gateway to the afterlife. Imagine the sheer scale of such an undertaking. Thousands of laborers, skilled artisans, architects, and engineers, all toiling under the relentless desert sun. The air would have been thick with the dust of quarried stone, the rhythmic chipping of hammers, and the shouts of overseers directing the colossal efforts.
Nebka, driven by his profound sense of duty and a youthful ambition that mirrored the vastness of the desert, became deeply involved in every aspect of the project. He wouldn't just issue commands from his opulent palace. He would visit the site frequently, his royal gaze sweeping over the burgeoning structures. He personally approved the designs, which were intricate and grand, reflecting the prevailing beliefs about a pharaoh's journey to the stars. Picture sprawling courtyards designed for funerary rites, towering pylons that seemed to touch the sky, and long descending passages leading to the heart of the complex. Deep within, the burial chamber was envisioned as a sanctuary of eternal rest, adorned with vibrant hieroglyphs depicting his life, his triumphs, and the protective spells that would guide him safely through the underworld. The pharaoh's meticulous attention to detail extended to the very materials. He demanded the finest granite from Aswan, the purest alabaster for his sarcophagus, and shimmering gold for the countless treasures and offerings that would accompany him. Remember how important these items were for the pharaoh's journey? They weren't just decorative. They were essential provisions for the afterlife, tools and comforts for his eternal existence. Every statue, every ritualistic object, every piece of furniture, even the provisions for his ka and ba, his spiritual components, were crafted with an almost religious devotion. The site chosen for this magnificent endeavor was a testament to both practicality and spiritual significance. It was high on the desert plateau, away from the annual inundation of the Nile, ensuring its stability for millennia. This elevation also placed it closer, metaphorically, to the heavens, aligning with the pharaoh's divine connection. Weeks turned into months, months into years, as the immense project slowly took shape. The sheer commitment of resources, human effort, and time was staggering, a true reflection of the pharaoh's unwavering belief in the eternity that awaited him. The first grand tomb was not just being built, it was being meticulously crafted, stone by painstaking stone, as a vessel for Nebka's ultimate journey. As the years of construction passed, and the first grand tomb began to truly dominate the horizon, a subtle shift in the air became noticeable throughout the kingdom. It began innocently enough, with whispers among the common folk, then among the priests, and eventually the unsettling murmurs reached the hallowed halls of Nebka's palace. These weren't the usual grievances of a populace or the political machinations of courtiers. These were whispers of disquiet, of things feeling wrong. First, there were the natural signs. The Nile, that lifeblood of Egypt, seemed temperamental. One year, its annual flood was unusually meager, causing concern for the upcoming harvests. The next year, it surged with unexpected ferocity, inundating areas that were typically spared. Farmers, whose lives were intrinsically tied to the river's rhythms, spoke of unease, of a disruption in the divine order. Then came the strange animal behaviors. Birds, usually abundant, became scarce in certain regions, their absence a silent, eerie void. Crocodiles, typically reclusive, were sighted in unusual places, their leering eyes seeming to hold an unsettling message. These weren't catastrophes, not yet, but rather gentle nudges, persistent whispers from the natural world that something was amiss. Within the court, these anxieties manifested in different ways. The royal astronomers, who meticulously tracked the movements of the stars and planets for portents, reported unusual alignments. Their hieroglyphic tables, usually a source of comfort and predictability, began to show anomalies, patterns that defied their ancient knowledge. Priests, who performed the daily rituals to appease the gods, spoke of a subtle resistance in the divine energies, as if their prayers were not quite reaching their intended destination. The air in the temples, usually thick with the serene scent of incense and devotion, occasionally felt heavy, as if burdened by an unseen presence. Nebka himself, despite his outward stoicism, could not ignore the growing disquiet. He was a pharaoh, yes, but he was also human, susceptible to the anxieties that permeated his kingdom. He consulted his most trusted advisors, his high priests and his viziers, seeking understanding, seeking reassurance. They offered interpretations, performed additional rituals, and made larger offerings to the gods, but the underlying current of unease persisted. It was a subtle, creeping dread, a foreboding sense that the grand plans for his eternal journey, for his meticulously prepared tomb, might not proceed as smoothly as the carefully carved stones suggested. The omens were not shouting, but they were certainly murmuring, and their whispers carried a chill that even the desert sun could not dispel.
The whispers had grown louder, the omens more insistent, and then the unforeseen calamity struck. It was not a sudden cataclysmic event, but rather a relentless assault of nature that began subtly and escalated with terrifying certainty. A period of unseasonably heavy rains descended upon Egypt, unlike anything witnessed in living memory. The dry wadis, ancient riverbeds that usually lay dormant and dusty for decades, became raging torrents overnight, carving new paths through the desert landscape. The normally gentle afternoon breezes transformed into howling gales, whipping sand into blinding storms that swallowed the sun. These weren't isolated incidents. The very foundations of the land seemed to tremble. Tremors, subtle at first, then increasingly pronounced, rippled through the earth. These weren't the devastating quakes that topple cities in an instant, but rather a series of unsettling shudders, persistent and unnerving. Imagine the sensation, the ground beneath your feet constantly shifting, a silent, unsettling reminder of nature's power. These tremors, combined with the incessant downpours and sandstorms, began to take a toll on the meticulously crafted structures throughout the kingdom. Buildings that had stood for centuries showed cracks, their mortar crumbling under the relentless strain. And then, the focus of this natural fury turned with an almost malevolent precision towards Nebka's nearly completed grand tomb. The elevated plateau, once seen as a blessing for its stability, now proved to be a curse. The heavy rains saturated the rock, weakening its internal structure. The tremors, though not overtly destructive on their own, created microfractures, invisible weaknesses that slowly propagated. The very top layers of the plateau, once solid, began to give way. Imagine watching, helpless, as sections of the carefully carved stone, vast blocks that had taken years to position, began to shift. The ground around the tomb became unstable, a dangerous mire of mud and loose rock. The impact on the first tomb was devastating. Sections of the finely dressed stone cladding, designed to protect the inner chambers, cracked and slumped. The delicate carvings and painted reliefs within some of the outer halls suffered irreversible damage from water seepage and the vibrations. Most critically, the entrance passages, the very gateway to Nebka's eternal rest, became unstable, choked with debris and prone to collapse.
The grand statement of Nebka's piety and power was literally crumbling, a stark, terrifying manifestation of the earlier omens. The years of labor, the countless resources, the unwavering belief, all now threatened by the raw, untamed force of the very earth and sky. The damage to his first grand tomb struck Nebka with the chilling force of a prophecy fulfilled. The relentless rains had ceased, and the earth had quieted its rumbling. But the sight of the ruined entrance, the fractured stone, and the debris-choked passages was a stark monument to a broken dream. His priests and engineers, after careful assessment, delivered the grim news. To repair the tomb to its original, pristine, and, more importantly, secure state would take decades, if it was even possible. The structural integrity was compromised in too many places, and the very ground beneath it was now suspect. The thought of his eternal journey being jeopardized, of his Ka and Ba wandering lost because his final resting place was flawed, was a terrifying prospect, a direct threat to his divine mandate and the stability of Egypt. Desperation, however, often breeds ingenuity, and Nebka was, above all, a pharaoh committed to his destiny. He convened a secret council, not of his usual advisors, but of his most trusted and discreet confidants, his personal architect, the chief of his royal guard, and his most loyal vizier. Their meetings were held under the cloak of deepest night, in chambers far removed from the prying eyes and ears of the court. The air in these clandestine gatherings would have been thick with the scent of lamp oil and the tension of their monumental secret. The pharaoh presented them with a radical, almost unthinkable proposal. If his grand public tomb was now compromised, then another, a second tomb, must be built. But this one would be different. This would be a secret tomb, hidden away, known only to the chosen few who would construct it, and ultimately to the gods themselves. The very idea was audacious, almost sacrilegious in its deviation from established tradition, which dictated a pharaoh's grand and visible monument. But Nebka argued with conviction. His afterlife, and, by extension, the prosperity of Egypt, depended on it. The challenges of this desperate new plan were immense. Secrecy was paramount. They couldn't quarry stone in plain sight, nor could they employ thousands of laborers. The construction had to be swift, efficient, and, above all, undetectable. They discussed remote locations, perhaps a less obvious wadi, or a hidden valley far from established routes. They considered scaling back the opulence, focusing on security and functionality rather than grand display. The workforce would have to be small, hand-picked, sworn to absolute silence, and likely isolated from the outside world for the duration of the project. Remember the vast resources poured into the first tomb? This second endeavor would require an equally significant, though perhaps more discreet, allocation of wealth. Gold, precious materials, and skilled craftsmen would be diverted in secret, their movements carefully masked. It was a monumental gamble, a race against time and the ever-present threat of discovery. But for Nebka, the alternative, an uncertain eternity, was simply not an option. He had to secure his passage, even if it meant defying every known tradition and shrouding his final resting place in an unprecedented veil of secrecy.
The decision to construct a second, secret tomb initiated a period of intense, clandestine activity. Imagine the hush that fell over the chosen few who were entrusted with Nebka's audacious plan. These were not just skilled artisans and laborers. They were men and women sworn to an oath of silence, more binding than any law. They worked in the deepest shadows, under the cover of night, or in remote, rarely visited corners of the desert. The location chosen for this new hidden sanctuary was a testament to the urgency and the need for absolute concealment. It was not a site for grand public display, but a place of quiet, almost defiant isolation, nestled deep within a less accessible part of the desert, its entrance cunningly disguised to blend seamlessly with the natural rock formations. The construction of this smaller yet equally vital tomb was a masterclass in discreet engineering. Unlike the first tomb's grand scale, this one focused on security and essential provisions. The passages were narrower, the chambers more compact, but the walls were thick, the rock solid, and the craftsmanship meticulous. Every chisel mark, every stone laid was a whisper in the vast silence of the desert. There were no grand processions of materials, no bustling throngs of workers. Instead, smaller, specially crafted tools were used, and materials were brought in piecemeal, often under the deceptive guise of other royal projects or simple trade. The most critical and perilous stage of this desperate plan, however, was the transfer itself. As Nebka's life drew to its inevitable close, preparations for his burial in the first tomb continued publicly, a grand charade to maintain appearances and quell any suspicion. The mummification process, an intricate and sacred ritual, proceeded with all the traditional pomp and circumstance. His sarcophagus, a magnificent piece of alabaster and gold, stood ready in the grand tomb's primary burial chamber, a visible symbol of his impending eternal rest. But beneath this public spectacle, a parallel, hidden drama unfolded. Under the darkest moonless nights, with only the faintest glow of lamps to guide them, a small team executed the unimaginable. Nebka's mummified body, wrapped in its linen shrouds, and his most essential funerary treasures, the canopic jars, his personal amulets, key items believed necessary for the journey, were carefully and reverently removed from the public sarcophagus. This was a task of immense delicacy and profound spiritual significance. Each movement was precise, each lift carefully orchestrated, ensuring no damage, no disturbance to the Pharaoh's sacred form. These precious contents were then transported not to the grand public tomb, but along secret, winding paths to the hidden second tomb. The journey itself would have been fraught with peril, every shadow a potential witness, every rustle of wind a possible betrayal. Once inside the secret tomb, the Pharaoh's body was placed in a simpler, unadorned sarcophagus, a vessel built for security rather than display. The chamber was then sealed with incredible ingenuity, its entrance disguised with such cunning that it became indistinguishable from the surrounding rock. It was as if the mountain itself had swallowed a king, leaving no trace. The public burial, days later, proceeded with an empty, ceremonial sarcophagus, a final, elaborate act of deception to ensure Nebka's true resting place remained a secret, known only to a handful of men, the very sand, and the ancient stars.
Centuries turned into millennia. The desert wind, a tireless sculptor, slowly smoothed the edges of the landscape, blurring the lines between what was ancient and what was eternal. Egypt saw pharaohs rise and fall, Empires expand and recede, and the memory of Nebka, the pharaoh who was buried twice, faded into the vast tapestry of forgotten history. Yet, even as his grand, publicly known tomb succumbed further to the relentless forces of time and the occasional depredations of tomb robbers, a faint, persistent thread of whispers began to weave its way through the generations. These weren't loud pronouncements or documented histories. They were the hushed tones of old storytellers sharing ancient lore around crackling fires, the quiet conversations of priests poring over cryptic fragments of papyrus, or the almost imperceptible nods between wizened desert guides navigating treacherous passes. They spoke of a pharaoh whose spirit was said to rest in two places, a king whose passage to the afterlife was unusually complex. Some tales attributed it to a powerful curse, others to an exceptional act of divine favor. Remember the strange omens that plagued Nebka's early reign? These whispers often connected back to those early anxieties, suggesting a profound disruption in the natural order that necessitated such an extraordinary measure. Scholars in later dynasties, meticulously cataloging the vast archives of Egyptian knowledge, would occasionally stumble upon a peculiar phrase in a crumbling inscription or a diagram that seemed to hint at an anomaly in Nebka's burial rites. A reference to the hidden path or the secondary house of eternity might appear in a rare funerary text, sparking a moment of confusion before being dismissed as poetic license or an obscure ritual. No one truly understood the fragmented clues, nor did they connect them definitively to Nebka. The secrets of the second tomb were too well kept, the oaths of silence too deeply honored. The publicly known tomb, though despoiled and partially collapsed, still bore Nebka's name, ensuring his place in the official records. It offered a plausible, if somewhat tragic, account of his final resting place. The occasional discovery of a fragmented cartouche or a broken funerary object within its crumbling confines only served to reinforce the prevailing belief that this was his sole tomb, albeit one that had suffered greatly from time and human intervention. But the whispers persisted, like the dry rustle of papyrus leaves in a forgotten scroll. They spoke of an anomaly, an unexplainable deviation from tradition, a pharaoh who, for reasons unknown, had sought to ensure his eternal journey by defying the very conventions of his time. These were the faint echoes of a desperate king's gamble, a silent testament to his profound desire for a peaceful afterlife, a legacy that would only truly be understood millennia later, when the desert finally relinquished its deepest secret.
For millennia, the two tombs of Nebka lay undisturbed by human hands, seeking answers, though the first, as we remember, had been disturbed by time and greed. The grand, visible tomb, though known, was largely dismissed as another partially plundered monument, its secrets seemingly given up to the desert winds. The hidden tomb, on the other hand, remained an enigma, its existence barely a whisper in the annals of history. But the relentless march of time brought with it new technologies, new methods, and a burgeoning scientific curiosity that would finally begin to unravel the ancient mystery. The early 20th century saw a renewed surge of interest in Egyptology, with expeditions fanning out across the desert,
their keen eyes and digging tools searching for what remained hidden. It was during one such expedition, perhaps led by a tireless archaeologist with a knack for noticing the unusual, that the first tangible clue to Nebka's second tomb was unearthed. It wasn't a grand entrance or a treasure chamber, but something far more subtle, a faint anomaly picked up by early geological surveys, or an unusual rock formation that didn't quite fit the natural patterns. Perhaps it was a particularly dense section of rock, or a slight variation in the mineral composition, a silent testament to human intervention eons ago. Driven by this intriguing data, a small, dedicated team began meticulous excavation. It was slow, painstaking work, removing centuries of accumulated sand and debris, rock by careful rock. Imagine the anticipation, the quiet intensity as they followed the subtle clues, until finally they uncovered not a grand portal, but a cleverly disguised entrance so ingeniously crafted that it seemed to be a natural part of the cliff face. When the first breath of stale, ancient air drifted out, it carried with it the scent of long-forgotten incense and the undeniable promise of undisturbed history.
The revelation of Nebka's double burial sent ripples through the world of Egyptology and beyond. It was a discovery that didn't just add another name to the long list of pharaohs. It added a new dimension to our understanding of ancient Egyptian beliefs, ingenuity, and the sheer lengths to which a ruler would go to secure their eternal destiny. This wasn't just a tale of hidden treasure, but a profound narrative of a pharaoh's spiritual journey, fraught with unforeseen challenges and overcome with an extraordinary act of will. Nebka's legacy, once somewhat overshadowed by the more famously opulent or tragically plundered tombs, now stood unique. He was no longer just a pharaoh whose grand tomb had fallen to ruin. He was the pharaoh who had outsmarted fate, who had defied natural disaster, and who had woven a sophisticated veil of secrecy to ensure his ultimate peace. His story became a testament to the ancient Egyptians' unwavering belief in the afterlife, a belief so powerful that it could drive a king to undertake such a monumental, unconventional endeavor. The meticulously planned deceit, the clandestine operations, the years of silent toil, all spoke to a profound conviction that the spiritual continuity of the pharaoh was paramount, not just for himself, but for the very fabric of his kingdom. The very existence of the two tombs presented a fascinating archaeological puzzle, a tangible manifestation of ancient problem-solving and adaptation. It showed that even within the rigid traditions of pharaonic Egypt, there was room for desperate innovation when faced with existential threats. It prompted scholars to re-examine other ancient sites, looking for similar anomalies, for other instances where unforeseen circumstances might have led to such extraordinary measures. The tale of the pharaoh buried twice wasn't just a singular curiosity. It became a lens through which to view the practicalities and spiritual anxieties of an ancient civilization. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long, peaceful shadows across the timeless sands, we can almost feel the gentle hush that would have settled over Nebka's true resting place. Imagine the quiet, the profound stillness as his spirit, his Ka and Ba, finally began their undisturbed journey to the field of reeds. All the fear, the desperation, the frantic secrecy had led to this moment of profound tranquility. His second tomb, humble in its outward appearance, yet sacred in its purpose, became the ultimate fulfillment of his deepest desire, a secure and peaceful passage into eternity. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest treasures are not found in gold or jewels, but in the quiet determination to achieve a longed-for peace, a comfort that transcends the ages. And so, as the night deepens, let your thoughts drift to Nebka, the Pharaoh who, against all odds, found his tranquil slumber. Feel the calm, the quiet assurance that even in the most ancient of times, the longing for peace and rest was a universal whisper, a gentle breath across the centuries.